Good afternoon, everyone. It is 1 o'clock, so we will go ahead and get started. Welcome to the webinar, Lead and Copper Rule Revisions 102, Taking Inventory 1 year later. My name is Elena Berg, and I am a planner in the Environment and Development Department of the North Central Texas Council of Governments. And I will be moderating this webinar. This webinar is hosted by NCT-COG and was prepared in cooperation with the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. And first, I'd like to provide you some background on what NCT-COG is. NCT-COG is a voluntary association of local governments. We are one of 24 regional councils in Texas. As part of NCT-COG's water quality management planning work, we host webinars on water quality topics every quarter. If you have any ideas for future topics for these webinars, please feel free to send them to me. I'd be happy to hear your ideas. And my email address is shown on the screen at eberg@nctcog.org. And today's webinar is a follow-up to a webinar NCT-COG hosted in May 2022, Lead and Copper Rule Revisions 101, and ideas on how water systems can start preparing. The recording of that past webinar can be found on NCT-COG's Environment and Development YouTube page, and I will post a link to that in the chat, and it's also found in your presentation slide. You should be able to click right on the link from the slide. And I'll also send a link to that webinar in the follow-up email to this webinar. And at this time, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar will last until 2:30 p.m. Central Time. We will hear presentations from 4 speakers. After each presentation, there will be limited time for questions, and instructions on how to submit your questions will be provided later. In order to receive the follow-up emails from this webinar, you need to be registered. If you're not registered, that is okay. Please just email me at eberg@nctcog.org and let me know you'd like to be added to that list. And of course, if you could please keep your microphone on mute until we get to the question and answer period. If you're not speaking, that will help us all with feedback and being able to hear each other better. And just a quick review of our agenda for today. First, we will start out with TCEQ with Laura Higgins, who will review some forms and guidance on the service line inventory and the latest and greatest news. And then we will get to hear from Stacy Walters in Fort Worth about compliance with the LCRR. And then we get to hear from the City of Irving with Robert Archer, who will provide us an update on their efforts. And then we will conclude with some talk about public outreach and risk communication for the LCRR with Mary Gugliuzza. And we're so glad they're here today. Thank you all. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Laura Higgins, with the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. Laura has a bachelor's in microbiology from Texas A&M University and nearly a decade of experience as a laboratory scientist prior to joining the TCEQ. Laura first joined the TCEQ as a laboratory assessor and microbiology expert within the Laboratory Accreditation Group. In 2020, she joined the Water Supply Division, where she enjoys her current role as a team leader for the Lead and Copper Monitoring Team. And with that, Laura, I turn the presentation over to you.
Thanks, Elena. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Just as Elena said, my name's Laura Higgins. I'm the team leader for the Lead and Copper Monitoring Team at TCEQ. And what I want to do today is lay some of the groundwork for the Lead and Copper Rule revisions and discuss the first steps that water systems can take to prepare their lead service line inventory. All right, next slide. So last year we spent some time going over some of the main elements of the LCRR, the Lead and Copper Rule revisions. So this year I want to do a brief recap of the LCRR and then discuss the service line inventory form 20943. So we're going to spend some time walking through the form and its requirements, and then spend some time discussing what you need to be focusing on and preparing right now to ensure compliance with the LCRR when we get to the compliance date in 2024. Okay, next slide. So EPA's promulgation of the LCRR is intended to meet the goals of proactively removing lead service lines from the distribution system, empowering communities through advanced public notification, and more equitably protecting public health for disadvantaged populations and children. With the publication of the LCRR, EPA announced the forthcoming Lead and Copper Rule Improvements, or the LCRI, which is going to expand on some of the elements of the LCRR, such as the sampling requirements, replacement plans, the lead testing in schools, and the public notification. So stay tuned for that. We're going to be busy for a while. Next slide, please. Okay, so outlined here just as a quick snapshot of the LCR and LCRR timelines. So we can see the lead and copper rule was originally published in 1991 with the rule language that we still currently operate under. The LCRR was published with an effective date of December 16th of 2021 and has a compliance due date of October 16th, 2024. That's the date we all want to circle on our calendars. And the lead and copper rule improvements that are currently under development are expected to be published before that LCRR compliance date of October 16th, 2024. Okay, next slide. So the LCRR contains some fairly significant changes from the lead and copper rule that we currently operate under. Some of the biggest changes are listed here, and there's a lot to digest in this new rule. But what I want to do today is just focus on the requirements for developing a service line inventory, as that initial inventory is the one element of the LCRR that EPA has told us will not change with the publication of the LCRI. So a lot of these are big changes. LCRI is going to change a lot of the individual details of some of these bigger topics. But for right now, let's just focus on the initial service line inventory, because we know that no matter what, that's not going to change in the future. Okay, next slide. Okay, so before we really dive in, I just want to go over some definitions that we should all be familiar with. So a lead service line means a portion of pipe that's made of lead, which connects the water main to the building inlet. And a lead service line can be owned by the water system, owned by the property owner, or both. A galvanized requiring replacement, that is a term that we see in the LCRR, and that means a galvanized service line that is or was at any time downstream of a lead service line. Or it could be that it is currently downstream of a lead status unknown service line. If the water system is unable to demonstrate that the galvanized service line was never downstream of a lead service line, then we have to presume that there was an upstream lead service line. Next slide. So goosenecks, pigtails, or connectors is a short section of piping, typically not exceeding 2 feet, which can be bent and used for connections between rigid service piping. And for the purposes of this rule, lead goosenecks, pigtails, connectors are not considered part of the definition of a lead service line, but you could be required to replace them pursuant to 40 CFR 141.84C. And then lastly, a lead status unknown service line means a service line that has not been demonstrated to meet the Safe Drinking Water Act definition of lead-free. So in talking to systems, we've heard a bunch of folks who were under the impression that if they had unknowns, they had to report those as lead. And that's not the case. So reporting service lines as lead status unknown is going to require some extra steps, such as providing public notice to customers. But that's because when you have unknowns, you can't say for sure that those lines are lead free, just as the definition explains there. So I just want to make that clear for folks that yes, there's some extra steps for folks reporting unknowns, but unknown is its own category. So having unknowns in your system does not mean that you're reporting lead. So just to clear up some of that misinformation that's out there. But go ahead, next slide, please. So this image, this is an image that was developed by TCEQ just to show some of the key features of a drinking water service line. This is typical to like a community water system. So just to denote some of the distinction between the public side and the private side of the line. So you have the water main to the meter box as the PWS portion of the line, the public side, from the meter to the building inlet as the customer side, the private side of the line, just so we can kind of get a visualization of that. Okay, next slide. All right, so now we're going to move on to discussing the service line inventory. So this citation here, 40 CFR 141.84, outlines requirements for lead service line inventories and material categorization. And inventories must include all service lines connected to the distribution system, regardless of ownership. And then LCRR tells us that we need to categorize each of those service lines into one of the four categories. So they're either going to be categorized as lead, galvanized requiring replacement, lead status unknown, or non-lead. Next slide. So all systems who are currently subject to the lead and copper rule are also going to be regulated under the LCRR and are going to be required to submit Form 20943 to the TCEQ by October 16th of 2024. All community and all non-community, non-transient water systems are going to be required to submit a service line inventory, even if the system confirms that the only service lines they have are non-lead. That's another piece of misinformation we've heard from folks, that they think if they don't have lead service lines that they don't have to do anything, and that's not the case. Everyone needs to submit a service line inventory by October 16th of 2024. Okay, next slide. Okay, this is my most important slide, and this is just to don't wait. October 16th of 2024 is going to be here before we know it. Time is a ticking. Start developing your service line inventory now. Okay, next slide. So this slide outlines what is included in that service line inventory form 20943. So each of these bullets represents a worksheet within the Excel workbook. The bullets on the left-hand side represent reference sheets that are used as background and information. And the bullets on the right are worksheets that have fields that the water system will need to fill out. So there's 9 worksheets in total. Some are background information and some have to be filled out. Okay, next slide. So in this slide, I want to point out that the worksheets that are highlighted in yellow, they're within the red box you see at the bottom of the screen. These sheets are used for reference and don't have fields that need to be filled out by the public water system. So beginning with the introduction sheet, this worksheet is used just for reference purposes, for organization, and descriptions of each of the following worksheets. The template instructions worksheet houses the directions for each of the required fields. So that's, if you have a question about what am I supposed to put in this box, that worksheet is a great reference for that. And then the classifying SLs worksheet, classifying service lines worksheet, is a great worksheet to be used as guidance for how to classify the entire service line when you have split ownership. So these 3 background sheets should be reviewed, look them over, understand them before you put information in on the rest of the worksheets. But of course, if you have any questions at all, please feel free to contact the lead and copper monitoring team because we're always happy to answer any questions that you might have. Okay, go ahead, next slide. So in this slide, just want to go over the sheets highlighted in blue that are boxed in red there at the bottom. So these are sheets that require information from the public water system. So beginning here with the PWS information worksheet, this is the first worksheet and it's going to house all the basic information on the public water system and the PWS representative. So information entered into this worksheet. We've got some fancy formulas built in throughout the template. So as you enter your system name and PWS ID, all of that information will populate onto further worksheets later on so that you don't have to continue to write out that information 10 times. So all of that should be just basic information from the public water system. Okay, next slide. This next worksheet is the inventory methods sheet. The LCRR requires a record review. And so part one of this worksheet allows systems to document their record review. The LCRR outlines 5 types of records that must be reviewed. So this table includes a column to say whether or not that record was reviewed, and then another column to provide some detail on what you reviewed. So yes, no, the record was reviewed, and then you can put in a little more detail about what exactly you looked at. Okay, next slide. Okay, so just to reiterate that a record review is required. The takeaway of this slide is just to urge folks to be creative sometimes with that record review. I hear a lot of times systems tell me that they don't have records. And I just have to wonder if they've exhausted all the different types of records available to them. So I want folks to think about not just records that you have in your office, but think about county appraisal district records, tax records, you know, maybe interviewing senior personnel that might have information about, you know, they were there when those lines went in. If you interview that person, write it down, put it in an affidavit, that's now a record. And you can use that as part of your record review. So all past and current maintenance and plumbing records, and of course, any service lines that are constructed and installed after the Texas lead ban, which was July 1st of 1988, those are likely to be non-lead too. So I want folks to kind of think about all these different records that are available to them, maybe not just something that you have in a filing cabinet in your office, but get a little creative and think about all the different records that are out there. Okay, next slide. So the other 2 tables that are within the inventory methods worksheet, part 2 and part 3 here, they're not required. I just want to point out that up until this point, all the fields that we've seen that are needed to be filled out have been kind of a bright aqua color. And I know these screenshots are kind of hard to see, but there's also a superscript X, and that means that those fields are required. So every time you see that aqua color and a little superscript X, you think X marks the spot, that field is required. But so we see these 2 tables do not have that aqua coloring. They don't have a superscript X. They're not required. They're optional information. It's just a place for water systems to be able to show what normal operations are used to identify and track your service line materials, and maybe what investigations were used in preparing your inventory. Please note that investigations are not required by the LCRR, again, hence why these fields are optional, but you can use investigations to assess the accuracy of your historical records and gather information when service line materials are unknown. Okay, next slide. So the inventory summary sheet is broken up into 2 parts. So part 1, which is shown here, includes just general information on service line ownership and local lead service line regulation, if applicable. But I want you to notice there's 2 aqua colored fields right there at the top. So those are 2 required fields, and that's where you're going to either specify whether this is your initial inventory or an inventory update. So everyone submitting their inventory for the first time is going to select that this is an initial inventory. And the second question there, who owns the service lines in your system? So you can select that the ownership is split. Maybe the water system owns the entire length of the service line, like what we see in a lot of our non-transient, non-community water systems. And so that's where you would select that information there. If the PWS owns the entire portion of the service line, they own all of their service lines. Designating that in this question will, there's some formulas built in. So as you work further through on other worksheets, any information relating to the customer side of the line will be grayed out. So you don't even have to worry about that if you don't have split ownership of your service lines. So that's why that question there is important to fill out and is required. So just a little note on that. Okay, next slide. Okay, so part 2 of the inventory summary sheet shown here is a table that's going to be auto-filled based on the information that's entered into the detailed inventory worksheet. That's the next one to come. So before you submit your inventory, just come back to this table, make sure that this table looks accurate. But in theory, you shouldn't actually have to enter anything into this table. So this is required information, but it should fill up automatically as you're entering each of your service lines on the next worksheet. So just a little feature. So when you finish, when you're all done, just make sure, yep, okay, I did have 4 lead service lines. I do have 3 non-lead, etc. You want to just make sure that all that information makes sense. Okay. Okay, next slide. Here we go. Okay, so this now is the detailed inventory worksheet. This is kind of the bread and butter of Form 20943. And this slide just shows a portion of that worksheet. Folks tend to get a little overwhelmed if I zoom out and show how many columns there actually are, but I don't want anyone to panic. Remember, the aqua coloring with that superscript X, that's what's going to tell us what fields are required. So if we look at that, then all this worksheet asks you to provide is a location identifier, the material for the system owned portion of the line, the material for the customer owned portion of the line, and the material classification for the line overall. The other columns are recommended because either they play a part in some of the autofill formulas that we've built in. So for example, there's a column that asks you if the system owned portion was ever previously lead. And remember, that's important to know in order to determine if a galvanized service line on the customer side is going to be considered a galvanized requiring replacement service line. So, and then some of the other columns could be useful for, future replacement plans, or we've also built in some features to auto calculate your the new tiering criteria that is under the LCRR. So we urge folks to fill out all these extra columns, but if we're just looking at what is absolutely required, it's a lot more manageable. So don't panic. And of course, always, you can refer to the template instructions if you're not sure what to provide in a certain space, or of course, feel free to contact the lead and copper monitoring team. Okay, next slide. The public accessibility worksheet, which is shown here, is used to confirm how the water system intends to make that service line publicly accessible to their customers. So notice again, we've got some required fields here on this page noted in that aqua. There's a little superscript X. So if you don't fill out any of the fields that are marked as required, the inventory is not going to get accepted. So you want to make sure to be aware of all these required fields and where they are. Okay. All right, next slide. And so then this last worksheet in the service line inventory form is the certification worksheet. This page is going to be used by the PWS representative to certify completion and understanding. So in each of these aqua cells, your rep is going to click the aqua box, use that drop down and select I certify next to each statement there. And again, just remember that all the information on this page is required. And so if it's not filled out, your inventory is not going to get accepted unless all these required fields are filled out. Okay, next slide. Okay, so now let's talk about some next steps. So public water systems are still going to be required to comply with the previous lead and copper rule until that LCRR compliance date of October 16th of 2024. So the other thing is just, again, stay tuned for whatever the LCRI is going to bring. But EPA expects to publish that prior to the LCRR compliance date. So we've got our next year or so up until October 16th is going to be a busy one. So stay tuned for more. All right, next slide. Okay, once again, here's a timeline of just all the events that have happened so far and what's to come. So as you can see here, EPA is expected to provide some more information on the LCRI this fall. And we are expected to have a published LCRI before the LCRR compliance date of, say it with me, October 16th of 2024. Okay, next slide. All right, so we just said that water systems are still going to need to comply with the lead and copper rule as it's currently written in the Texas Administrative Code until we get to that LCRR compliance state. But what else should water systems be doing? So the first thing I recommend is that everyone take the time to read the LCRR. For the second year in a row now, I have condensed a whole bunch of information into a 20-minute talk. So knowledge is power, and I hope everyone just takes the time to read the LCRR and the guidance document that EPA has published. There's expected to be a second guidance document from EPA. They were supposed to publish it in April, so maybe they'll publish it this month or in June. That one's specifically going to be geared towards small systems and NTNC systems. So take the time to read some of those. They have a lot of great information in them. Second, I urge everyone to start working on their service line inventory. TCQ has an instructional YouTube video along with some other links to some helpful resources on our website. So start now, get a jump on that. Additionally, just knowing that the end goal is going to be to, get the lead out. Now is going to be a great time for systems to work to get ahead of the game. So once you have a sense of your service line inventory, then you're going to have a better sense of what funding options might be available. Always check out EPA's website, some other federal websites to see what grants and programs they have. Texas Water Development Board released a drinking water state revolving fund solicitation specific to lead service line replacement. Unfortunately, I think for this year, those PIFs are due tomorrow, May 23rd, but know that they have funding available, quite a lot of funding. So I would urge everyone to check out the Texas Water Development Board's webpage. And then finally, if a system is already on the corrosion control pathway due to either an action level exceedance, source corrosivity identified by the plan and technical review team, or maybe simultaneous compliance issues, then that water system should keep moving forward and working towards becoming optimized so that they can increase their chances with compliance when the LCRR date finally comes around. All right, next slide. Here's just some additional links. All of these resources are also available on TCQ's LCRR webpage. And that's also where you can find the service line inventory form 20943 itself, links to our instructional YouTube video. We have an FAQ page. We have a SOP template for water systems to use when they're conducting service line investigations in the field. And we've got a whole lot more that's in the works right now. So check out our webpage as well as all of these links. And then finally, last slide. Here is my contact information along with the email addresses for our program. We recently created a new email address for questions specifically related to LCRR, and that email is simply lcrr@tcq.texas.gov. Thank you, everyone. I'll open it up for questions right now if anybody has any, or if we have time.
Thank you, Laura. Yeah, we can take just a couple of questions, and you can ask your questions by either typing it in the chat and I will read it for Laura, or you can raise your hand and I'll call on you and you can unmute and ask your question verbally. So are there any questions? And hopefully, as we move through, we'll have time to do questions for all speakers at the end. We'll see how we move through. Okay, if there's a question in the chat, Laura, how many points need to be tested on the service line?
Ooh, that's a good question. So I'm going to reiterate again that investigations are not required from the LCRR. Record review is required. So you don't have to be in the field at all for this initial inventory. You can write unknown, and that's good enough. If folks are going to start working on their inventories and do investigations in the field to verify unknowns, we don't have necessarily a set way to do that. Our template SOP helps folks walk through how they're going to document that, but we've heard from different water systems, it's different for everybody. Some folks can look in the meter box and determine the material of the service line just from that alone. That's preferred. The least invasive is preferred in our opinion. Some folks can just dig just beyond the meter, and that's fine too. So we don't have necessarily a set number of points that they have to test in order to determine. We're asking folks to do, their own due diligence, whatever you would feel comfortable certifying at the end of what you think you need to do to feel confident that that is the material. But again, investigations are not required. Record review is required. Just want to say that one more time.
Okay, thank you. And I see there are some additional questions in the chat, but we're gonna keep moving forward just to make sure we get through all the speakers, and then we can come back to these questions. Or Laura, if you feel you can address them in the chat.
Yeah, I'll write them in the chat.
Okay, thank you so much. That sounds good. So Laura will be working on that, and I would like to introduce our next speaker, Stacy Walters with the City of Fort Worth. Stacy is the Regulatory Environmental Administrator for the Fort Worth Water Department. Her responsibilities include oversight and coordination for the utility's environmental legislative activities. Her responsibilities also include oversight of the laboratory testing activities for the Fort Worth Water Department, and she interacts with other city departments and external agencies. She has over 30 years experience in environmental science, and she has covered many areas, including project management, regulatory compliance, and program maintenance as required for federal and state regulations. And now I'd like to turn the presentation over to Stacy. Please go ahead. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Elena. Good afternoon, everyone. Today, I want to share with you some of the information Fort Worth has learned regarding the lead and copper rule revisions. So we're going to approach our strategies to compliance. Next slide, please. So as we all know, on December 16 of 2021, the lead and copper rule revisions were effective. What did that mean? That means that we were given a compliance date to come in line with the new rule and regulation. And some of the information that's new to this rule is we now have to test schools and licensed child care facilities. We must also have an inventory of all of our services. And if your system serves more than 50,000 persons, then you must make that inventory publicly available. And on October 16th of 2024, which is approximately just a little bit less than 18 months away, we have to submit our service line inventory to the TCEQ. And if you have lead or galvanized requiring replacement, or even unknowns, then you have to submit a lead service line replacement plan with your service line inventory. And remember, that's all due on October 16th of 2024. So as we move past the compliance date in October, how is Fort Worth going to prepare for compliance? And so in 2025, starting in January, we are also going to make sure our tier information has been updated because of the inventory. We now have new, potentially new services that will come into that tier that we need to update for our compliance monitoring. But we also need to develop our plans for our child care testing and our school testing. So how is Fort Worth doing that? Well, we've divided our testing for our child care into two buckets. We're looking at child care testing for commercial entities, and we're also looking at child care testing for licensed in-home child care. And we're doing the same thing for our schools. We're dividing those into two buckets. We're looking at independent school districts that are located within our service area. In Fort Worth, we're estimating somewhere between 14 and potentially up to 16 school districts in our area. And then we're also looking at other schools, which would be charter schools, private schools, state schools. So you want to make sure you understand how you need to move through that process for your specific utility. And just remember that EPA is developing the lead and copper rule improvement. So there's still some opportunity here for some changes to the rule that we need to be prepared for. Next slide. So Fort Worth's inventory includes more than 288,000 service connections. And I'm happy to report that we have completed our inventory, but as most of you know, our city is constantly growing, so we're still getting information into our system. As part of our inventory, we found 10 lead services on the customer side, which is the private side of the meter. We have more than 30,000 galvanized requiring replacement services. We have 0 unknowns, and we've created a separate category we're calling other, where we may have a service from the main, but there's no service extending from the meter box to the structure because there is no structure. So basically it's a vacant lot. And so what we wanted to do in Fort Worth, we wanted to distinguish between an unknown and where there is no service. That's why we created that other. And you may look at this graphic and you say, how does Fort Worth not have any unknowns? Well, we did have some unknowns when we initially finished our inventory, but our staff went back and looked at those unknowns to try and determine what that service material was. So I am happy to report today that we have 0 unknowns in our system to date. Next slide. So the next thing we're doing in Fort Worth is we're developing our replacement plan. So Laura talked about some of the things you can do to review your records. So you have your county appraisal district. You can look at some of your ordinances. You may have some inspection records, your customer service inspections, historical records. We also looked at capital improvement plans. And in some cases, you can look at your customer service agreements. So as part of our plan review, we know that the lead and copper rule revision recommend full lead service line replacement. That means if you're going to replace the service, especially on the public side, then it recommends that you replace the service on the private side, if that's the case. We also had to look at how do we inform those customers when we're wanting to have a replacement, or even if we're replacing any of the service. How are we talking to those customers? In Fort Worth, we created a letter where we notified the customer that we found lead service or galvanized requiring replacement. We try to be specific in our communication to the customer to let them know exactly what we're seeing. And then if we can estimate the time in which we will replace the service, then we're going to put that in a letter as well. But also following up with the customer as we get closer to the date of the replacement. We are establishing a replacement goal. We have not determined that as of yet, but we realize that we need to look at how we're going to replace all of these services within our system. Also, once you replace, there's a flushing procedure. When we find lead services, we know we need to tell the customer that they need to flush their line. And so how are we going to go about that process? As well as testing. Testing is a big part of this rule. And when you find a lead service or galvanized requiring replacement and you replace those services, you probably have to do some testing to make sure your customer is okay, but also verifying that they know what's going on with their service. And then how do you prioritize those services? How are you going to look at that to determine what services you're going to replace? For instance, you may decide if you're exceeding the action level, those services may get moved up in that replacement plan versus those customers that don't exceed the action level. And then I think the big question here for all of us as utilities is how do we fund public funds on private property? And so in Fort Worth, we're looking at a lot of different options. There are some federal grants out there that we're looking into. We're also looking at WIFIA, which is a federal opportunity as well. And then you definitely have your state revolving funds that also have some opportunities for you to apply and hopefully determine if you meet the minimum qualifications for that replacement. Next slide. So I want to talk to you a little bit about compliance monitoring. One of the things that we know changed in this rule is we now have a 10 ppb trigger level, which is your 90th percentile calculation. That is new for us in this rule. Once you do your inventory, as we talked about earlier, you got to go back and look at your tiers. We know the first tier says if you have a lead service, that's tier 1. So you got to make sure all those services that you found, you got to move those into the appropriate tier information. I think one of the biggest challenges we're going to have as a utility is the rule now requires 5th liter sampling. As you can see here with this graphic, the 1st liter will be copper, tested for copper. The 5th liter is proposed to be tested for lead, but we got to verify that the customer pulled 5 liters. So how are we going to adjust for the space in our laboratory? How are we going to adjust for delivering 5 liters of bottles to the customer? So those are the things that we're challenged with right now, determining what does that look like and how do we mitigate that process moving forward. And then, of course, there's the fine and fix. If you exceed the 15 ppb action level, then what does that mean for you as your utility? How are you going to do that? One of the things we're going to do in Fort Worth is we're going to issue pitchers and replacement filters for those customers because we know we need to have a mitigation strategy in place because we can't replace the pipe overnight. That's going to take time and effort, and we got to make sure our customers feel safe and they know that we're taking all the extraordinary steps to do this process. As you know, this is a public health rule, so we want to make sure we're meeting all the health implications that the testing could cause. Next slide. So another big effort in the lead and copper rule revision are schools and daycares. Well, in some cases, you may have been testing your schools, but in most cases, we have not. So the thing that we're working through is making sure our schools know they need to be using the EPA 3Ts. Why is that important? Because there is some funding opportunities for schools and childcare facilities. in order for them to be eligible for that funding, they have to be testing using the 3 T's guideline by EPA. So we're making sure all of our schools and childcare facilities know we're going to be testing using the EPA 3T protocol. But there are some differences in that protocol as we are used to as a utility. One of the first things, that protocol requires 250 mils sample containers. As I just mentioned in the previous slide, we're used to the 1 liter sample containers. So you want to make sure your lab understand they may have to have 2 different bottles, one 250s for your schools and childcare, and then your 1 liter for your homes. And then instead, the water must be unused for 8 to 18 hours. That is also a change. Also, schools are required to take a minimum of 5 samples. Here I list where those samples need to be taken from. And then your childcare facilities or daycares, they have a minimum of 2 samples. Also listed here is where those samples have to be taken from. So it's not just 1 sample per school. As you can see, there are some minimum requirements under the 3T rule. Next slide. So how are we collaborating? As we've talked about, this lead and copper rule revision is massive. It is a lot to keep up with, and it's a lot for us as a utility. So we're working within our utility to make sure our stakeholders understand what does that mean for them. One example, if we find a lead service or galvanized requiring replacement as our system has, if there's a new service that has to be set up for a customer, then we have to educate our customer service representatives on how you need to communicate with that customer. There may be some public information that we need to engage them with, but also provide for them, but as well as making sure they know to flush that line, because that house may be dormant for months or weeks, depending on what's going on with that particular address. And then we have our other city departments. In Fort Worth, our commercial facilities, our commercial childcares, they have been used to testing for lead because our code enforcement, which is under our consumer health group, has been testing for lead. So they understand this process, but we still have to make sure they understand what's changing in the new rule and how do those changes impact them, as well as our development, neighborhood services group, just different other departments within our city. And then we have our state agencies. Of course, we talked about TCEQ, but we're pulling all of that school data from the Texas Education Agency, and then we're getting our child care data from the Texas Department of State Health Services. And one of the other local collaboration is that the rule now requires when you test a school or childcare facility, you must submit those results to your local health department, as well as the school and the or childcare facility, in addition to TCEQ and Health and Human Services. So there are a lot of different collaborative efforts that have to go on, not just in setting up this process, but also after the results have been performed and submitted to the school. And then lastly, we're looking at collaboration with plumbers, as we indicated. This is a public health rule. If for some reason we're seeing some test results because we've had to change our tier information to show that a particular address is exceeding the action level or they're close to the trigger level, we may have plumbers go in. We're looking at setting up contracts with plumbers and certifying those plumbers to help us figure out what's going on with that particular address, as well as looking at our builders and developers. And also, one of the things we're paying close attention to, we're mapping all of our schools and childcare facilities throughout our system so we can look at how we're monitoring those systems. We don't want to be heavily in one council district versus another council district. So we're looking at making sure we're being equitable across all of our city to make sure we're not heavy in one district versus another. Next slide. So as you can imagine, there are a lot of resources that we have to bear as part of this lead and copper rule. Of course, funding is one of those things. We talked a little bit about it. Communicating with those customers, but not only that, we have to communicate internally, making sure that we all understand what we need to do when we have a main break or when we have a leak where a service has been disrupted, because this rule now requires us to do certain things. If we have a lead service or galvanized service, that there's certain things we have to do to make sure the customer knows what's going on. Also, if you have not talked to your laboratory, as I've mentioned, you want to make sure you have conversations with them about the different bottle requirements, but also maybe helping them understand what your plan is so that they are ready for you when you bring in those additional samples from your schools or childcare. And then, as I mentioned, operationally, just making sure we're all on the same page and ensuring that we're following the rule requirements, not just for notification, but also for compliance as well. Next slide. So this is Fort Worth's path forward. As I mentioned, we completed our inventory, but even though we're complete, we still have to make sure we're capturing all the things that are happening in our system today. We're working on our replacement plan, but the other caveat to this rule is that if you serve more than 50,000 people, you must make your website publicly available to show the customer where your lead services are. So that's another part of this rule. Then you want to collaborate with your internal stakeholders, your outside entities, and your regulators. One of the things we're doing is we're creating a plan for our schools and childcare, and we're actually looking at developing some different tools to help us with that process so that we understand what daycares have sampled, what daycares need to be sampled, and how we're going to go about that process. Compliance monitoring, well, we talked about schools, we've talked about child care facilities, but we still have to do our compliance monitoring. So making sure you understand how that compliance monitoring is going to fit into that process. One of the things I want to remind you is that schools are not open all year long. So you want to make sure you front load that process so that you're capturing your sampling when schools are in session so that you don't have the issue of water sitting dormant in those schools during your testing process. And how are you communicating that with all these different stakeholders as part of that? Of course, we talked a little bit about our reporting, our different agencies, what the requirements are for the customers. And then there's the record keeping. It's not just enough to do all these things. We also have to monitor how we're keeping our records. For example, if a daycare or school decides that they don't want to participate in your lead and copper revision plan for sampling, you got to document that process. And there's a decline to participate form that we've actually developed. Unless TCQ has a different form, then we'll work through that process as well. Your test results, how have you decided you're going to address sampling if one of your schools or childcare facilities exceed the action level? Do you have the ability to scale that plan if for some reason you have to go back and test again? And then there's the picture filter distribution. For instance, as I've mentioned, if we have a disruption in service, a main break or something, we want to make sure our customers know that we have picture filters to distribute them until we can figure out what's going on under the find and fix part of this rule. Next slide. So this is our to-do list by October 16 of 2024. We're developing our service line inventory. We've eliminated all of our unknowns. We're now preparing our website for displaying. We're working on developing our lead service line replacement plan, including how we're going to deal with find and fix. We're working on our SOP. We're working on our sampling plan for our schools and childcare facilities. We're updating our sample pool in accordance with the new tiers. We revise our sampling protocols to meet the new requirements. Make sure you talk to your lab so they understand what their capacity is and how you need to interact with them. Last but not least, you want to definitely develop your public education materials and your notification protocols for those customers that you have determined will need additional information as part of their service line inventory. Next slide. I want to thank everyone. My name is Stacy Walters, and this is my contact, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Stacy. Great presentation. There is a question in the chat, and we'll just ask Stacy that question and then we'll move on. I know she's probably gonna have many more. So, and it is from Emilio Reyna. When a lead service line is located, do we inform the customer within the 30-day time frame, or do we inform the customer after the initial inventory is complete? Stacy, can you take that one?
Yes, so I probably need to go back and verify if there's a stipulation on the time frame, because we're not in compliance yet with the rule, but I can tell you when we found the lead service, we did notify the customers immediately. And then we tried to estimate a time in which the service would be replaced. And then we went back and notified them again if there was any slippage on that time frame. So just making sure you understand what the different rules are regarding notification. But I can tell you, if a customer, if you find lead, or one of the things it requires, if we find lead on our side, or we're replacing and a customer has lead, there are some notification protocols that we have to manage as part of that process.
Thank you for that. And Laura Higgins also chimed in on that answer too. And Stacy, there are two other questions in the chat about how Fort Worth verified your unknowns. So if you want to take a look at those, and we'll move on to our next speaker, Robert Archer. So we make sure we get to everybody, and let me give Robert a proper introduction. We are so glad he is here. He is the Environmental Compliance Manager with the City of Irving. He has a water operator, B wastewater operator, wastewater collection 3, and a CSI license. And he has over 17 years of experience in the water and wastewater industry. Thank you for being here, Robert, and you may go ahead with your presentation.
Awesome. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for having me. Since the last update, City of Irving has been a year ago. At that time, we're in the process of creating SOPs and just figuring out how we were going to tackle this. So since then, we have successfully been able to set up a dashboard, essentially with our IT group and our technical services group here in water utilities, utilizing the GIS or ISRI solutions. So this dashboard is going to serve multiple aspects for our program, right? This dashboard visually allows us to see our known assets, allows us to add pictures that have been captured with part of our work order systems of each known asset, right? So we can attach the pictures from the work order systems that are captured out in the field, and we can attach it to each asset that is selected. Of course, you can see on the dashboard, everything that's blue means it's got a picture and it's been identified. So the pictures are going to include both the city side and the customer side of the material for each meter, right? So our plan is, once we hit about 95%, we plan on putting this live on the city webpage. That way, each one of our residents can go online, they can find their address, click on it, and be able to see the pictures themselves of the material. Now, of course, you can see on our dashboard, we started off with our known assets, right? We utilize resources like our billing, archive data, the previous as-built construction plans, which gave us that known assets of 48,225 services, which we started off with, right? So you can see right now where we're at. We've been chipping away at it. We have roughly about 26,133 left to do, to go out and visually see. So with some of the archive data that we spent a lot of time going through, we were able to confirm the time frame with a pre-88 which was about 20-some thousand. Right now, we have roughly about 12,000 services that fall into that pre-1988 window, which take priority, right? We want to get out there and visually see. You can see, of course, on the dashboard. We also we have it broken down on the dashboard. You know, lead, copper, PVC, high, other, galvanized piping, both on the city and the customer side. Of course, things that are marked as other, we go back out and re-verify. The reason why I say that is essentially we're not doing this alone, right? With support from our city leadership, right? We have a really strong city leadership team. We have been able to secure additional aid in identifying all these locations, right? We are utilizing our contractors, which are currently doing our meter replacements anyways, which part of upgrading our system. So these contractors are also doing surface material identification for us. They're taking pictures. So part of creating SOPs was looking at resources we had. Those resources that we had were the contractors were going to be at locations, changing meters. So we have it set up where they can capture timestamp pictures of locations, and they send that in to us daily. So we're able to go through it, create a work order system or create a work order for each location and get it into the system. Right now we sit at about 1,500, I guess, with what to do internally ourselves, City of Irving employees that fall into the pre-88 window. Of course, our goal again is to have 100%. We'll plan on going live about 95%. But we want the entire city services captured. So again, we just got to keep chipping away at it, right? We have also been able to create and add a position with equipment that is committed and dedicated to solely being out in the field every day, going to a minimum of 4 service connections per hour to clean out inventory each site, right? Which is really time challenging, of course. But our dashboard allows us to break up into a MAPSCO grid. So we have a strategic aspect of it, right? We can break it up in small grid patterns or MAPSCO grids, and allows us to one, assign to our contractors a known area, and keeps us from having a lot of duplicate work orders and issues that way. That way we are maximizing our efforts. We have been in communications with our schools, right? I know that's a big thing, right? We've been communicating back and forth with our schools, keeping them up to date as needed, as to what we'll be expecting in the future, right? So long term also is another thing, right? That extra position that we were able to occur from our city leadership will be able to strictly focus on the sampling and priority with our public schools and our private schools. So long term, not only out in the field right now doing the inventory, but is going to be focused on strictly the school aspects for the additional of that sampling requirements and public outreach. Now, some of the biggest advice of just tackling this is some of the benefits, right? Look at it necessarily not as, oh, the state is making us do this, the government's making us do this or whatever, but it's been a fortunate opportunity to really gain as much information about and knowledge of our system, right? We've been able to be out in the field, address issues that probably have been long past due. Simple things like adjusting meter boxes. While we're at location, we're able to adjust meter boxes, make them level. Some of that customer service aspects that come with this and gaining knowledge of our system has been super beneficial. And of course, having that buy-in from the city leadership most definitely is a big plus. But long-term goals, we want to have all this information captured for our city and have it out there for the public. But that is kind of the status of where we're at right now with Irving. Does anybody have any questions?
Thank you, Robert. And we do have time that we can pause and take some questions about the City of Irving's dashboard or questions you have for Robert. And you can raise your hand and I'll call on you to unmute, or you can type your question in the chat. Are there any questions for Robert? Okay. Oh, there's a hand raised from Ronald Cox. Go ahead, Ronald. You may unmute.
Thank you. Yeah, since nobody else asked him a question, I was just wondering, when you go back and you look at your inventory of houses, you probably don't have plans from historical houses, even though it may say built in 1901. And then, of course, during World War II and post World War II, when the housing boom began again, how do you keep up with that inventory of what year that house was made, built, and then, there's been modifications to the home. Electrical services have been updated from 100 amps to 200 amps, and so you go through that whole scenario. So how do y'all kind of identify the subject ones? I know you're looking at all of them, but you're specifically trying to go after the ones that are known.
Yeah, exactly. So we did run into that with some of that, where even stuff that was installed, in 2012 didn't have specifics if it was, copper or PVC or what. So without having that verification, that's why we just kind of broke down and say, you know what, we're going to go out and visually see each location, um, you know, and then of course, like you said, some of that information, the older locations, of course, for Irving was centralized, where there was those predates of 1900, 1901, where there was no, there was not even any information of improvements, but it looked like there'd been a new house built there in the 80s. Essentially, that we just broke down to the point where, okay, we're going to go to each location, we're going to clean out inside or outside each meter box, and we're going to visually see ourselves and capture a picture of it, so we have that not only captured in work order systems for archive, but we have that as a visual representation for each customer to have a peace of mind in the long term.
Thank you.
And I saw a question there from Tina in the grab in the chat there. We are using just the ISRI. I don't believe we're using the LCRR tool. I think our team created this, but I think they are using the Esri Survey 123 is what I believe we are utilizing.
Okay,
Oh,
thank
yes.
you.
And I'm sorry, I did not make a little slide for my contact information. I will write my contact info in the chat for you all.
Perfect, thank you. That was my next question, and I'll include that in the follow-up email to the group too, if that's okay with you, Robert.
Yes, that's totally fine. It depends. Also, to answer that last question there, how far back we go to the meter, it depends. We try to stay inside the meter box, but that's not always the case. So a lot of times we'll go, up to 2 to 3 feet outside the meter box. It also depends. There's trees, tree roots. There's a lot of different variables. So that leaves us to, had to get a little creative to how far back we go. Of course, we, make the repairs as necessary from there.
Okay, and one last question here for Robert, then we'll move on, and that is, how much time did each inspection / clean out take?
Oh man, like I said, we average, we got lucky. We got a really good group, really good team. So we started off with 2 an hour is what we requested, but we utilize a sub back and just small little tow behind sub back. And right now, 4 an hour is I mean, they're killing it. On a good day, he can do anywhere from 6 to 7 an hour. Just depends on the neighborhood and the conditions. But we started off with our SOP with 2, and now we've had to change it to 4 as a standard because they're moving along pretty good.
Wow, that's great. And you can still ask Robert questions in the chat, but we're going to move on to our final speaker. And that is Mary Gugliuzza from the city of Fort Worth. And let me give her a proper introduction. She is the Media Relations and Communications Coordinator for the City of Fort Worth Water Utility, where she has worked for over 27 years. Mary chaired the American Waterworks Association's Public Affairs Council from 2018 to 2021 and now serves as its vice president. She is a native of New Orleans and has a journalism degree from Southwest Texas State University in San Marcos, Texas, now known as Texas State University. Thank you, Mary, for being here, and I turn the presentation over to you.
All right, thank you very much. And some of you may have heard me talk before on the subject of communications in the LCRR. I did some talks at Texas Water and at Texas Municipal Utilities Association, the webinar that we did here, and some others. So this is going to be a little different because I don't have a lot of time. And if you've heard those, you know that there's a lot of detail in those. I'm very willing to provide those more detailed slides to anyone who wants them, and my contact information will be at the end. But if you are not already overwhelmed by what you've heard from Laura and Stacy and Robert, I will probably push you over the edge now. And let's go to the next slide. So what I want to point out is that when EPA promulgated the LCRR, it actually incorporates changes to 3 different rules. There are major changes to the lead and copper rule, yes, but there are also promulgated changes to the Consumer Confidence Report rule and the public notification rule pertaining to lead. And the other thing I want to point out is when you look up, you can't just look at the LCRR. You have to look at the entire lead and copper rule, previous and current, combined. And it's out there now electronically in the Code of Federal Regulations. You can find it online. Because the rule, the LCRR only outlines what changed. It didn't outline what didn't change, but there are still things that didn't change that you have to incorporate into your communications. So you have to look at these things holistically and not just in the bubble of the LCRR as you're preparing your outreach pieces. For example, to give you an example of how these things overlap, if you have an action level exceedance, the public notification rule will come into play, and that it's now a tier 1 violation, and you've got 24 hours to notify your entire system. Now, having said that, in the LCRR, it also adds additional requirements that you have to do notification within 60 days. And those are rather extensive notifications. So to various groups. So you need to make sure you're aware of that, because you've got 60 days. You've got to, even though you've done the 24 hours to your system, you have to get a notice out in 60 days to all your bill paying customers, to your local health agencies. And even those that aren't in your system, it says, you got to include groups that they identify in the rules, such as we got schools and childcares, but they're here where they have to be noted if you have an exceedance. School boards, WIC programs, Head Start, private and public hospitals, medical clinics, pediatricians, family planning clinics, local welfare agencies, OB-GYNs, and midwives. So the list is extensive, but you won't find that list in the LCRR. You have to look at the entire rule to understand all those obligations. So I just wanted to give that example there. And let's go on to the next one. Every aspect of the lead and copper rule has some level of public outreach associated with it, whether from inventory to the compliance sampling, again, the public notification requirements, if there's action level exceedance. You got lead service line replacements. When you're doing those, there's notification that goes with those. Your corrosion control and the find and fix aspects that go with that have some outreach. School and daycare sampling, obviously a lot of outreach with that. Even disturbances, and those fall into two categories, really three if you count construction, but those things impact communications, have communications required around them, that annual outreach to health departments on certain things, and then the changes in what you have to put in your annual water quality report is slightly changing from what it has been. So everything, there's a lot to this rule when it comes to public outreach. Next slide. So the challenges that I see utilities have is really developing all of these notifications and outreach materials, because you have 30 days after you complete your inventory to notify all the customers who have lead service lines, all that have galvanized requiring replacement, and all the unknowns. And what you say to each one of them is slightly different per the rule. So you got to understand that. That's 3 individual communications right there. And by the way, you have to repeat those every year until one of those 3 service line types is no longer part of that inventory. So until you replace it, or you determine the unknown is not lead, you're going to have to do annual notification to this group of customers. Those stakeholder lists that I mentioned earlier, you don't want to be developing those at the last minute when you need them. You need to be working on developing those now. And how are you going to figure out where to go get those lists? How to figure out where are all of the medical clinics? Where are all of these things? How are you going to put that list together? And it's pretty daunting, I must say. And then that school and daycare testing, we as a utility, though we're required to be the ones doing this sampling or testing, I won't say the sampling because we plan to have the actual schools and daycares do the sampling itself. We will handle the testing. You're not communicating with the parents. You don't want to be the one communicating with the parents of those kids. So you got to make sure you've established that with and that's part of that 3 T's EPA process. But how is that communication going to happen? And make sure they understand. The other thing is you're going to be giving these results to the principal. You might be dealing with the plant ops or facilities maintenance staff in collecting those samples and organizing this for them. But the rule says you have to notify the school. So the principal's aware they're going to be getting this, or they're going to get hit out of the blue. So you got to think about that. And then internally, Stacy touched on some of this, but how is customer service going to know when somebody opens a new account to let them know that they may have a galvanized requiring replacement service line? So you got to have that internal communication of how they're going to access information, how it's going to be available to them to see, to be able to tell customers. You got to work that out. Or if your meter services staff is out there changing a meter in the field or turning off a customer for non-payment, there's communications that have to go around that. if they have one of these 3 types of service lines. So how are they going to know? And then how is the lab going to know in the cases of certain of these disruptions where it says you got to go back and offer them testing 3 to 6 months later, or you got to give them a picture filter? How is that going to be handled? How are you going to handle that internal communication so all staff are working toward the requirements of this rule? Next slide. So this is just my quick, I say quick, I've looked at this rule a lot, but this is just my assessment. And I think my number 14 is already up to 15, that I've changed it again, as I think of additional, and I say printed materials, but actually some of those are videos that I think we need to put together to help customers understand how to do that 5-liter sampling. So different things, but these are the types, numbers I've come out with. What you don't even see on this list is if you exceed the trigger level, not the action level, the trigger level. I haven't even put numbers on here for the number of communications that you have to do. If you exceed the trigger level and a year later you fail to meet your replacement goal, and if 2 years later you still fail to meet your replacement goal, there's even more communications, and those aren't even in these numbers yet. I have no idea to estimate how much time and effort this is going to take, but it is going to take a lot. It's already taking a lot. But this is a very intensive program, and I want to encourage you that if you have not talked, if your city has a communications person, but your utility does not, go talk to them, bring them into this process, get them to help you develop these materials, because you want to try and make these things easily understandable. You know, we talk about flushing. Well, we know that what flushing means, and it's not just flushing the toilet, but to customers, that may be all they think of when they hear the word flushing. So maybe what we need to be saying is, you need to run your faucets for X amount of time. Those kinds of things, so they understand what it is we really want them to do. Excuse me. So next slide. I've listed a lot of resources. You've seen some of these on some others. One thing I do want to urge you is that TCEQ's Drinking Water Advisory Work Group, not just for this rule, but for anything. If you have not signed up to get the notifications about those quarterly meetings, which are done both in person and online, I urge you to do that. But right now with the LCRR, they're doing an additional session, usually about an hour long, after the DWAG meeting, to talk just about aspects of this rule. So keep that in mind, and go to that website and register to get those notifications. The next meeting should be in July sometime. Next slide. So one other thing I want to point out is the AWWA has put out a lead communications guide and toolkit. I believe this is available online, that you can access it without being an AWWA member, although AWWA is offering a lot of resources for those that are members. But there is this out there that you can see that has a lot of good information in it and breaks things down for you. So I urge you to go and download this and share it with your communications folks if you have them in your city. I also want to mention, Texas section of AWWA has been working with TCEQ and Michelle Risco and Laura, and we are working on a series of webinars, 6 to be exact, to break down this rule into its different components, and talk at length about it. We're planning to start in August and go through November with these, late August through early November. Information should hopefully be coming out in another month or so, but And I'm hoping to make these interactive with good time for Q&A from all the utilities out there, but also some panels and bringing in different folks from different utilities of different sizes who have been working on different aspects of this. And maybe even some consultants when it comes to corrosion control and some of those other things. So just wanted to let you know, we're trying to get the word out because as Laura said, she's amazed that she talks to folks and there's still utilities who said they didn't know anything about this. So we need to spread the word as best we can about this. Next slide. I think that's all I got. I didn't get to go into a lot of detail because I didn't have a whole lot of time. But I'm glad to have any discussions with anybody about questions about the communications aspects of it.
Yes, thank you, Mary, for your presentation. And we certainly do have a few minutes for questions. If you have anything on public outreach or risk communication for Mary, now is the time.
I will mention that AWWA also has a risk communication guide that's available to download for free. That's been out there. It was produced several years ago when I was actually chair of the Public Affairs Council, and it's got some good information about the different types of communications needed in different search situations and some good case studies.
Thank you for that. And if you have a question, just raise your hand and you can unmute and ask it or type your question in the chat. Okay. Thanks for the overwhelm, Mary, was one of the comments. Are there any questions overall on LCRR for all our speakers? Because we do have a couple minutes for that. Okay, Laura Higgins, go ahead.
I just wanted to say for Amber, who's feeling overwhelmed, and for anyone who's feeling overwhelmed, once again, feel free to call the Lead and Copper Monitoring Team, call me. Me and my team are more than happy to walk you through any aspect of what it's going to take to get this this work done, but also our free financial, managerial, technical assistance group. We can send folks out to you to help you in person work on finding records, work on entering things into the template. They can, if you've got technology issues of how to get it over to us, we can send somebody to you to help. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, reach out. We will get you some free help to assist.
Thank you so much for that information. And I see Tracy Peterson, you have your hand up. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I just have a question for people from other cities. If anybody has had any, someone who's outside of the industry, someone like a resident or media or city council people, have you gotten inquiries about this, about the inventory, about the changes to the rule? Does it seem like anyone besides us is talking about this?
Okay, so you go
I
ahead.
was going to say, Tracy, I haven't heard a lot of talk outside of it yet, outside of our sector as well yet. We know that we're going to have to go to our council, and I think that's something all the utilities need to be planning for, is how they're going to talk about these changes with their boards or their city councils. There is obviously substantial cost to some of these requirements. You know, postage alone, if you've got to do notifications and on annually on these letters you have to send and anything else without having a violation. Those are things you need to be thinking about in budgeting. And those are things that the council is going to need to, or your governing body, because some may be not cities, but need to be aware of. So yes, it's something that needs to happen for sure.
Okay, and I'm sorry to rush you through, but I will send you the speaker's contact information in a follow-up email. There is a survey to provide your feedback right here. You can click on it on the screen. We'd appreciate you letting us know what you thought of the webinar today and if it was helpful to you, if you have any topics for future webinars. And I will be sending a follow-up email with the presentation slides and recording. And if you did not RSVP and you want to receive that email, please let me know in the chat or email me at eberg@nctcog.org and I will add you to that list. And I also want to take time right now to thank our speakers, Laura Higgins, Stacy Walters, Robert Archer, and Mary Gugliuzza for their time today and sharing this information. We really appreciate it. And with that, this webinar is now over.